Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to episode 140, Best Practices for Cyber Resiliency with Veeam. As you might be able to tell, I am in somewhat of a makeshift location, but I am joined by my colleagues Brad Lynch and Edwin Weidema. Gentlemen, we're going to be talking today about how can we help offer best advice to make Veeam more cyber resilient, more hardened, as well as just tee up a little bit of the problem statement with some industry-wide research that Jason Buffington and I have previewed on earlier installments of the live stream. But before we go any further, let's do some introductions. Brad, since you're next to me in the middle there, let's kick it over to you. You're no stranger to this. Actually, neither of you are. But just remind folks what you do at Veeam.
Yeah, appreciate you having us on, Dave. So my name is Brad Lynch. I manage an enterprise systems engineering team at Veeam. So pretty much on a daily basis, working directly with customers, having this exact conversation we're going to have today. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. And Edwin, over to you, who is joining us late his time. So I appreciate you taking some extra hours on the workday to visit with us.
Yes, thank you, Dave. Thanks for the invite, by the way. Edwin Weidema, I'm the field CTO for EMEA, but also the lead cybersecurity technologies for Veeam worldwide. Been with the company almost 7 years, but also people can know me because I've been 30 years an hacker. So yeah, enjoying this, and let's talk about resiliency.
Yeah, perfect tee up. And so if we go to our first slide, just want to share but a couple of the research points that we did in our Ransomware 2023 report. We debuted that at Veeam-only just this past May. Just a quick recap, what is this? Where did this information come from? This is 1,200 organizations globally that got hit with ransomware. They're not all Veeam customers, by the way. In fact, about 6% only of the 1,200 are Veeam customers. So this is global, this is industry-wide or industry agnostic. No one knew Veeam was asking the question. Just to kind of tee up the problem statement, gentlemen, we've heard that the bad actors are going after backups, and this data bears that out. What you see here is indeed the question in orange: did the threat actors attempt to modify to delete your backup repositories? The short answer is they most definitely did, 93% of the time. Unfortunately, the maybe better answer there in green, 18%, less than 1 out of 5, said the bad actors tried to attack our backups, but they were unsuccessful. Unfortunately, 75% of the time, the bad actors could damage some or all of the backup repository. If we go to the next slide, though, this is a bit of a wait, it gets kind of worse. So we asked a simple question again across the industry. How long did it take you to recover? On average, it took about 3.5 weeks to recover per attack. We've got other research that shows that for half of us, 49% of the organizations, they're getting hit 2 and 3 times a year. So if on average, you're spending 3.5 weeks, you've got many months that you're trying to unwind. But some of the boundary conditions, Brad and Edwin, I always like to look at, you literally have 21% of the people, better than 1 out of 5, saying it took me 1, 2, 3, or 4 months to unwind per attack. So that's the bad news. Want to end up on a slight positive before we kind of jump into Veeam and what you can do. The first bit on the next slide is, well, what you can do actually turns out to be good, safe backup targets associated with what you are protecting. And Edwin, that's where you come in. How do we have good, safe backups?
Yeah, it's about understanding those cyber attacks, because people are going, or the cyber attackers are going after backups. But why? A lot of people think ransomware is just magic. It just pops in and you're encrypted and it's all done in seconds. But it's really not, because if you really look on how a cyber attack is being built up, it starts with an observation phase. They will just look at your organization, look at people in your organization who could be a viable target or an easy target. From there, they will try to sneak in. So they will send out phishing emails towards those people. They want you to click a link. If you click the link, okay, click that link and I'm in as a hacker. That could be one group. If they build that and they have access to your environment, they have your infrastructure access, they could sell it off to another party there. So another party will just pick it up. They will build a base of operations. I will select a machine in your organization that hasn't has the last patches. It's like not the latest and greatest in operating systems, and they will choose that particular machine to be the base of operations. They will disable all security measures there so they can work easily and undetected. Because that's the whole part about hacking. You don't want to be detected, because if you're being detected, you will be kicked out. After the base of operations, they have high availability. It sounds like IT personnel, right? They also build it high available because if something goes down, they want to come in through the other door. And that's where they're going. And from there, they will move to like the elevated access and lateral movement. And as you can see, this is already a time span of almost 9 months. But this is what we see in the field. And that's also, if you go to the surveys, we have seen like the data protection trends report with 85% of people notice that they have been attacked and have a ransom. The other 15% most likely in this bucket because they have been hacked, but they haven't found anyone in their infrastructure. They haven't seen them yet. And this is the interesting part, or not so interesting, because they will go also for your backups to exfiltrate backups and exfiltrate data. That's what you will see, that red in the middle. They're trying to steal your information, trying to steal your IP. It's not about ransom at this moment in time. It's just about getting information out of your system. But as I always explain to people in the field that are not so familiar with like a cyber attack, it's like going into a hotel blind as a hacker. I will go in, I will touch, I will find the reception, I will go, I find the loo, staircase, bar. Hey, hold on, that's interesting. Mark bar, and move on through the building. But you have to really move through it. And that's those 4 phases there, trying to see where they are, because they also don't have a clue in what infrastructure they stumble into often. Because of those 4, it's interesting to know, why do they attack backups? Because you, as an organization, already determined that everything that's viable to you, you take a backup of, right? Otherwise, why should you take a backup? And from there, we move to the next phases. So after this, they will sell it mostly to another group and a party that's specialized in ransomware attacks, and they will come into your infrastructure and they will start crippling your recoverability. So they will go again after your backups, but not to exfiltrate them, no, to kill them, to remove them, to make sure that you as an organization have no other choice than to pay up. And after the cripple recoverability, you will see that they will declare ransomware. And that's on the right-hand side of that whole timeline. That's where the ransomware portion comes in. So people saying like, yeah, I want to detect ransomware in my backups. Hold on, that's only at the last part. And normally, you don't see any backups after that anymore. So the ransom portion is often not in the backups. But what you will see is along the line, a hacker like me will drop tools, because we also need tools, and we are lazy, so we automate things. So we have like ping beacons, Cobalt Strike beacons, remote access tools, AD Find, all tools to map your infrastructure. And by mapping your infrastructure, I know where I have to go, where's the interesting party, but also where are your backups, and trying to get those out. If you want to go back to things, and people will say, yeah, but I have to go back because there's a dwell time of 200 plus days. I have to go back 200 plus backups. Of course you don't, because no organization can ever survive 200 days without data. What you will do is go back to the right-hand side, go to the backup just before the encryption started and the whole, between brackets, party started on your end. That's where you go back to. And are those backups clean? No, because all those malware tools are there. But also those malware tools haven't been picked up by your production security measures. And it has a reason, because those tools will be brought in by a hacker, completely crunched, encrypted, and making sure that it lands on the command and control where all security measures have already been disabled. And from there, they will unpack it again. And as Lego, they will just rebuild the tooling they need and start from there. So if you want to go back to a backup, always go back to the backup just before the ransomware party started.
Yeah, great anatomy of a cyber attack, Edwin. And we're going to come back to when Edwin said go back to the backup just before launch. There's actually some Veeam technologies that can be helpful there. And Brad and Edwin, if we go to the next slide, just kind of want to talk a little bit about, there are multiple different ways within Veeam today. In fact, I could argue we could build even more things into this slide. Brad, I'll leave it to you to unpack, and then we can verbalize some additional capabilities. But kind of take us through from left to right. I see, the primary copy of your data, then we go to the backup stream. What's happening here?
Yeah, absolutely right. And just to preface this a little bit, right? There's a reason everything Edwin just went through and the data that Dave just went through, that's why ransomware is the worst kind of disaster. It's not a normal type of DR where it's a power outage or a natural disaster. Because of the sophistication of some of these attacks is why it can take 3.5 weeks to recover, or why some of your immutable backups or your backup repositories are compromised. And Veeam's core one of our core security principles is having an immutable copy, right? And having an immutable copy in multiple locations. So for example, in your primary location where you target your backups, you could go to a hardened repository. The beauty of this hardened repository, for a couple reasons, is super secure. One, no credentials are stored on the Veeam server. So really there's two scenarios a hacker gets in, right? Either one is on the backup server itself and they start trying to delete things, or scenario two, they actually log onto the repository box itself and trying to delete things. In both of these scenarios, you're protected because Veeam doesn't store the credentials. Your files are locked as immutable. So as they start to delete files, and we'll show this in a demo, they get access denied. Then at this point, if they try to log onto the box itself, one, they didn't get the credentials from Veeam because we didn't store them. But let's say somehow they did get the credentials from somewhere else. Well, you can disable SSH. So now you're talking about a scenario where someone has physical access to your data center, and you got a lot of other things to worry about at that point as well. But to expand on this, right, you can go direct to the dozens of S3 compatible object lock technologies we integrate with: AWS, Azure, Wasabi, NetApp Storage Grid, EMC, ECS. The list goes too on for me to list them all, but there's dozens of them. And then dedupe appliances that we integrate with from a retention lock and immutability perspective. Folks like HPE Store Ones, Exagrid, and in our next iteration, Data Domain Retention Lock. And something I really like to highlight, and that's a differentiator for Veeam, is that the secondary copy doesn't have to be like for like. This is one of the beauties for Veeam. Your primary copy might be something very performant, or in a ransomware attack, you can recover quickly, but your secondary copy might be something that's still somewhat performant, but also economical to the business from a TCO perspective. So your secondary copy can go anywhere. That's also immutable, right? So it can go to everything we just mentioned. It can go to an object storage. It can go to tape. And you can archive out, of course, to S3 Glacier and Azure Deep Archive. So really powerful options, making sure you're immutable from soup to nuts. And it's important to know, right, your data is encrypted both at rest and in flight during this process.
And I like to double click on what you just mentioned there, Brad, because natively within Veeam Backup and Replication, we have the Linux hardened repository. That's no charge. And that's something that we can implement on your behalf. We can automate that largely. So even if you're not a Linux guru, you're a Windows person, you're a Windows administrator, we can make that a very simplified operation. But to your point, we can actually instantiate using one-time credentials such that we can create the repository, point to that. Veeam doesn't know those passwords. Once you disable SSH, to your point, to put a finer, sort of exclamation point on that, the only way to come in and modify and delete data out of the hardened repository is if you have physical access to that server's keyboard and the administrative password. So you're already broken perimeter security. You're inside of the room. You have admin password, but at that point, maybe you don't even need it. If you have a pair of pliers or a bucket of water, you can do a significant amount of damage. So there's a lot of ways inbuilt within Veeam or through our very expanded partner ecosystem. When you mentioned the S3 compatible, 32 different providers that can offer that, dozens more on top of that from an integrated array perspective, and then tape. So there are options. And Edwin, I sometimes think this capability of having multiple different layers of immutability through different means offers even greater protection because it doesn't represent a single point of protection and potential compromise. You have multiple methods.
Yeah, Dave, that's true. That's also what I'm saying. As a hacker, connectivity has consequences. Having different choices in the whole layers. So having defense in depth, different layers, but also different protocols. Because what you're talking about, the hardened repository, and then going to, for instance, object storage, you transform into S3, or even go to like a dedupe appliance, going to a different protocol even. That makes it much, much harder for a hacker to go through all those different hoops, and they will just bail along the way.
Yep, perfect. So, Brad, I like this slide. Where are you going to recover from? Obviously, this looks like a big list. Take us through that.
Yeah, well, it's a perfect segue, right? And I like to phrase the question this way rather than what will you back up to? Because backup means nothing unless you can recover from it in a way that's both secure and performant. So that's really why I phrase that. And of course, anybody listening is saying, you're using something today. I'm gonna restore from something. But just really ask yourself, is this something that's secure and immutable, like we just went through? And more importantly, it's great to have a copy and a clean copy that hasn't been touched by hackers, but can it perform in a way that meets the business needs? Edwin, you touched on it before. If you go to your CIO, CTO, CFO and say, hey, great news, we got a clean copy yesterday, but it's going to come out of tape and it's going to take us 3 weeks. The next response from those executives is going to be, what's this Bitcoin thing, and how do we create a Coinbase account? So you really want to make sure you've architected your environment in a way that makes sense to the business as a whole. So for example, oftentimes it's multiple ways you're recovering from ransomware. One of the ways might be what we just talked about, off of a hardened repository, out of a immutable object block repository in the cloud. But it's also a combination of off of storage snapshots. And I'll dive deeper into that, where we've seen several customers avoid paying the ransom by leveraging Veeam to recover off of storage snapshots, which is naturally going to be faster than recovering off of a disk-based repository, right? You're talking about a $1 million all-flash array at that point. And then other ones to highlight here is replication. Veeam is the only product in the industry that offers true failover, right? When we talk about this, we're talking about replication at the hypervisor level, as well as being able to recover from your backups. All of that in the same license, on a license of Veeam you can buy that doesn't include that. And then of course offline options like tape and things like that. So really great options available for our user base to design both a secure and a performant way to recover.
And I got to chime in there because you mentioned the $1 million storage array, which, I love the Ferrari of solutions. But I'll just tell you right now, in my home lab, I use externally attached SSD drives on a USB-C connection, and I just indicate eject the drive at the end of the backup. So literally for drives that I bought for a couple $100 off of Amazon that are actually pretty fast in performance, I can create in my own home environment an easy air-gapped approach by just telling the volume manager eject the drive. So it's not like we're trying to convey immutability as only for the chosen few. There are so many ways to achieve it that at this day and age, you should be having at least one type of immutability in every part of your backup scenario.
Yeah, and if I might chip in there, the design for recovery, what you said, Brad, that's the really important part, the 3-2-1-1-0 rule. But a lot of people don't think about the free copies. You can also use those free copies for 3 different recovery streams simultaneously. So getting data from different angles, from different locations towards where your DR will be.
Great point.
Yeah, really good point. And this brings us to, and I don't say this lightly, I don't take this as a marketing term, the fastest recovery options, right? From here, once you have that secure copy, the whole point is actually being able to recover in a ransomware attack, improving on that 3.5-week stat that you showed earlier, Dave, right? And because of Veeam being the only one that, once again, offers all 4 of these, right? True failover, true DR, true failback at the hypervisor level, the time it takes up to boot up a machine, you're talking about seconds or minutes from a recovery perspective. And then to the storage integrations, right? I've seen several examples where we've helped customers recover from ransomware, avoid paying the ransom. One of them was a healthcare customer who was hit by Ryuk, a very sophisticated ransomware attack. They recovered 1,700 VMs, 500 terabytes of data in 5 days, did not pay the ransom. They were able to recover off their secondary 3-part snapshots. And this is something you can do with Veeam, whether we orchestrated these snapshots or not. You simply just go to the snapshot, see the VMs, and start doing instant VM recoveries off of them. And then thirdly, being able to restore anything, anywhere, right? Whether it's a physical machine, a virtual machine, taking that physical machine, restoring it into the cloud as an AWS or Azure VM, taking an AWS EC2 and restoring it as an Azure VM or vice versa. I mean, truly any permutation of this works, which is so critical. And then lastly, I'd just like to highlight really quickly, yeah, everybody does instant recovery, so why is this on the slide? Well, first of all, we were the first ones to do it, so I think that's worth mentioning. But secondly, what we've kind of been mentioning, you can design this in a way that you can do instant recovery off of anything, right? It doesn't have to be a disk-based appliance. People in the industry used to look at us kind of crooked when we said, hey, maybe don't back up to tape, back up to disk. And certainly I wouldn't say, to Dave's point earlier, you don't need to back up everything to flash. But if you have 5 to 10% of your environment that's really, really critical to the business, maybe you back up that to a small all flash array and then everything else to a disk-based repository. And we take it to the next level, right? You can do instant VMDK recovery, instant file share recovery, instant database recovery for SQL and Oracle. So maybe it's just a small set of things that were infected that you can get back quickly. So this is critical to Veeam's value and story of our resiliency and our recovery process.
Yeah, well said. And I like your next point here. So now let's think about where you're going to recover to. You kind of verbalize that a little bit, but we've got a graphic on that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, so kind of how we've been dancing around this, right? Is the main point here is, right, your primary copy can be a number of immutable options, right? Your Linux hardened repository, object storage, dedupe appliances that we integrate from a retention lock perspective. But it's important to keep in mind that you can recover that anywhere. Just to hit this point home, I can take anything that I'm backing up to this primary copy and recover that to anywhere. And Edwin highlighted it in his anatomy of an attack slides, where that's critical. You have to be able to recover somewhere else. Most likely, wherever the infected area is, you are not going to have access to during that time. And sometimes we've seen in cases it can be a month, 2 months that you do not have access to it, depending on the type of company you are and if legalities are getting involved, law enforcement's getting involved, things of that nature. So you need to be able to recover somewhere else easily. And then, like we said, the secondary copy can be anywhere, and you have the same recovery options on that secondary copy. There's no differences between your recovery options on your primary copy and your secondary copy. And then lastly, I just want to state real quick here, Dave, that the portability of this is what's so key. If this main Veeam server in the middle blows up or gets lost or is compromised, whatever happens, it really doesn't matter. You can install Veeam on the laptop you're looking at us on. You can install Veeam on a cloud machine in Azure, AWS, GCP, and simply insert your encryption keys, scan that repository, and you're off and restoring into the cloud or wherever you need to restore to.
Yeah, I think that's worth doubling down on, because we write in a self-describing manner, meaning the metadata is commingled with the data. Bad actors for a long period of time have gotten into the habit of just blow away the backup catalog. While we use a catalog, that's really there as an accelerant. To your point, we're not dependent upon that. And just to put it down in layman's terms, even in my home environment, I write out the data on an ejectable SSD drive. I also put our no-charge reader for Windows and for Linux, a reader like a PDF reader, think of it as. If you have the credentials, you can pull out a file. Also, to your point, though, Brad, if you need to stand up everything, you can download any instance of Veeam, including the Community Edition, no-charge version, enter your credentials, and start streaming that data back. So it is not infrastructure dependent. It's not dependent upon Veeam configurations. All you need is the data, and we've got ways to harden the data, and we've got ways to recover that data to different locales and different methods. So I think you've got some screenshots that help exemplify some of what we've been describing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first step of what we're talking about is definitely have that secure backup, have that ability to recover fast, but also be able to know what restore point you're going to use to be able to recover fast, right? Don't spend countless hours or even days trying to find the right recovery point to restore from. And what Dave's highlighting here is our recovery verification capabilities. So right in here, you can define within Veeam to say, hey, scan my backup files, and you can specify the last 10, the last 20, whatever makes sense to you, and scan them until you find the latest clean recovery point. So rather than doing this manually, that can take a lot of time to manually mount a backup file, tell your DBAs, tell your SecOps teams to log in, do some scanning and see what they see, and then let you know, oh, this looks bad, start the 2 days ago's backup. That whole process can take days. So this automatically scans that backup file, does the scanning itself. If it finds something, it immediately moves on to the previous restore point. And as you can see here, it integrates with any type of AV scanner that supports a CLI. And here it's giving me, all looks good, Brad. This copy is ready for recovery. But just to show you an example of a scenario where, maybe we do find something suspicious, it's saying, hey, your most recent restore point looks to be suspicious. We're going to keep scanning for the last one. So just a really powerful capability here to help you speed up that process of investigation so you can quickly find the latest restore point to recover from.
Brilliant. And as we begin to wind down just a little bit, there's also a monitoring aspect to that that's important to note as well.
Absolutely. So this is something I really like to highlight because oftentimes, and including us, many players in this industry, a lot of what they provide from a monitoring standpoint, from a ransomware detection standpoint, is you have to understand that's post-breach. The breach has already happened, and it's analyzing your backup files. Now, don't get me wrong, we offer several alarms in the same category. But what I really want to highlight is some alarms that we offer that actually look at your workloads before you even take backups, which is a very big differentiator in our industry. So number one is we will actually look at your production workload on a per VM basis, and you can look at it from a calendar view, which I really like. So maybe the attack's taking place and you're trying to figure out your last clean recovery point. Well, this gives you an idea of, hey, when did spikes in CPU happen or spikes in data store write rates take place, which are all signs of encryption, right? Encryption is a very heavy, intensive task on these VMs. Now, maybe something occurred on this day and something changed in the environment, but maybe something didn't happen on July 30th, for example, and this is something to look into. So a really nice alarm that happens before the backup. A second one I really like is oftentimes in these more sophisticated attacks like a Ryuk or a Conti, things of that nature, they go in and they disable services. They disable the AV scanning tools on the individual machines. They disable VSS on the Windows machines, and many more, unfortunately. You could set an alarm within Veeam on the OSs that say, hey, let me know if all of a sudden one of these services is stopped. They should never be stopped. So I just wanted to highlight a couple alarms that do look at things before backup. And then, of course, we do have a great one that does look at your actual backup files, right? And this can be imported into your backup file statistics and let you know, hey, based on your backup file patterns, this latest backup looks a little suspicious in terms of size, which is a sign of encryption, right? We're not getting good dedupe. The backup's taking a lot longer. It's a lot larger. So things of that nature.
Thank you, Brad. That was awesome. Now, Edwin, let's transition a little bit and talk about things that can not only help Veeam customers, but really an important topic overall around patching.
Yeah, Dave, patching, it's like table stakes. Everyone forgets about it. So that's also what you see on the screen. If you ask different people within a company, the system administrator will just say, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't do anything until we have to. But on the other hand, if you look at the security engineer, it will just say, okay, come on, we have to patch it now, directly now. Why? Because trust comes on foot, at least with your fry. What does that mean? Now, to build up trust, it takes a long time, but to lose it, it's like in a blink of a second.
Yeah, and so the important thing here is really patching all systems because in many cases, that's how the vulnerability was launched in the first place. As you mentioned earlier, Edwin, in the anatomy of a ransomware attack, it was some known vulnerability that was exploited initially. Now, when it comes to our backup systems, same kind of thing. Every backup vendor has a certain amount of vulnerabilities that we detect and close rapidly. In fact, if you search in your favorite browser engine, CVE, which just stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exploits. If you search on CVE and your backup vendor name of choice, you'll see that all backup vendors do have exploits that get known, discovered, and patched rapidly from time to time. And it's important to stay up to date on that. So what you see on our slide here, Edwin's actually placed a QR code, and I appreciate we're talking about cybersecurity and QR codes. So if you don't want to click on that QR code, we've also got the URL, www.veeam.com/KB3103. KB just means knowledge base. We keep up to date, Edwin, on a continual basis, our best patching recommendations and descriptions around those, don't we?
Yes, we completely do that, Dave. So also if you go to that same link, veeam.com, and then /knowledge base, you can also subscribe to security advisories there.
Brilliant. As we kind of come to a close, Edwin, could you just kind of take us through a little bit of a recap here? I love the phrase that you've got, and I won't steal your thunder as it comes on the screen now. But how do we get to this good, favorable position after talking about all the dangerous things out there?
Dave, you have been in the service for years, right? So we all know that you cannot be 100% secure. You cannot protect yourself 100%, because if you look at attackers, they only need to be right once. We as defenders have to be right always. That's like impossible, like a mission impossible. But what you can have is 100% cyber resiliency. And how do you do that? So 100% cyber resiliency, go to protect, look at those autonomous backup data. What we have autonomous backup data, but make sure that it's encrypted. Remember the timeline? That there was exfiltration. Make sure that those backups are encrypted. So if they steal the backups, no worry, they cannot read them. And then follow the 32110 rule. So make sure that everything that Brett covered there, make the right choices that fits your organization. And when it fits your organization and you have immutable tested in there, but also like an offline and air gap, than what you expressed and presented that, Dave, just have a tape coming out. I would even remove it from the tape and put it in a vault somewhere, also for fire. But making sure that it's out of the tape streamer, also make sure that it's already offline and air gapped. So just tape, and everyone thinks tape is dead, but tape is on a revival there. So if you can click one more, Brad, for me. Also recover. Data freedom, making sure that you can pick up the data, but also remember the timeline. You want to go back just to the last backup, not 200 days ago, because you will not survive that one. Make sure that you use secure restore. Connect that with your malware scanner at choice. Make sure that you use the best in the business to scan those backups. But also don't ask a backup vendor to remove malware from the backups, because if you look at the protect side, you ask them to be immutable. If it's immutable, you are not authorized to change it or delete it. So those two don't match. So make sure that you have an option that if you do a restore, use secure restore, connect the malware scanner, and go back to production or DR side completely clean, and give those malware scanners, and we cannot blame them, because in production they have milliseconds to determine any data coming through. Is it good? Is it suspicious? Is it bad? Give them more time. If you give them more time, I will promise you they will find those particular malware strings in your backup already. But also think about design for recovery. Because we all did design for backup, we have a 24-hour window, 5% change rate. That means that the whole infrastructure pipe is only fitted for 5% right. If you have to do the recovery, what Brad was talking about, that means in that scenario, you need 20 days to do 100% back. If you have free copies, make sure you already have free streams, so that 20 days will be covered in 3 days or divided by 3, so there's 7 days roughly. But make sure that you design it. So think about duration, RPOs, RTOs for your environment, your application chains. But also think about how are you going to do that. If you only have a few VMs, you can do it manually, right? But if you're not doing it for a few VMs and you have a few thousand VMs, maybe think about Veeam Recovery Orchestrator and start automating that stuff. But also think about where you're going to do it. Because if you have your data on one of those locations and one of those free copies, make sure that it's already in the DR designated area. Because that means that you can just pick up the data, start recovering directly, and choose from like cloud, the Veeam service providers out in the field there, or your second data center. And one more, Brad, if you can click that one. Yeah, it's about to. Oh, there we go. One back, please. Yeah, there we are. So it's about detect, see all, know all. What's coming in version 12a? Inline ransomware detection. Remember that timeline with all that malware in between? That's all about what we say encrypted data. Making sure that we will find that before we even come to the last stage. So in the first 2-3 stages, so around March, April in that timeline, because of the inline ransomware detection, we will find entropy, randomness. And that randomness will say, hold on, look at this machine because this one is suspicious. Then you can connect your malware scanners, use secure restore in a sure backup, run it through, and you will find that you already have been compromised. The principle of assumed breach. Trust me, it's out there. And also use Veeam-only, but also use our compare features. We didn't have the time this time, but Brad and I did some things. We can compare Active Directory, for instance, with the backup and production. Don't rebuild the whole Active Directory. Just look what changed and remove all those things that changed and then go back to production.
Well, Brad, Edwin, this has been awesome. I hope if anyone's learned anything, it's that there are many different built-in within Veeam capabilities to make you more cyber resilient. To Edwin's point, you can't always plan on stopping the attack. In fact, you almost have to assume that the attack will happen. So instead, look at how do you become more cyber resilient? How do you get back online faster? How do you detect better? How do you recover quicker through a variety of options that Brad walked through? So thanks for joining. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next live stream.